Hi, this is week 3's tutorial. So first up in the tutorial, we did the quizzes individually, and students worked through them quite quickly now because they had started really reading and understanding what's in the module. So it's important you do keep up with this course. And then we discussed some of the answers in the tutorial. And some of the answers, I'm not going to go through them individually because you can actually do that yourself by doing the team-based quiz if you've missed the tutorial for this week. But what we're going to do is go over sort of what the information was about. And remembering the information is all in the modules and in the extended little mini lectures to look at. So we talked first up about qualitative research. And this is about quality, the experience. It's expressed with words, observation, and it builds an understanding. We also talked about how this is small samples, that often when you're interviewing someone, it's only a 30-minute interview, but by the time you've transcribed that verbatim, word for word, that could be up to 6 pages. And so you don't want to be doing 100 of those. But, you know, once you've done about 10, you've got 60 pages, and that's a lot of stuff, a lot of writing to read through. What we did talk about then is that sometimes the sample relates to what's called data saturation. And so you might be doing interviews until you're actually getting to hear the same things from your sample. We also looked at inductive and deductive. And we talked about how this can be in qualitative, but also in quantitative research. And so we looked at inductive. This is searching for the reason, so where you're having observation and measures and you're looking for patterns, and then you're sort of developing a bit of an understanding, a theory. And deductive, it's the other way. So this is where you've got an idea of what might be happening, and then you do interviews and you go through the process, if it's quantitative testing a hypothesis, to actually sort of confirm that. And so in qualitative research, deductive would be where you sort of have an expectation that, and then you might use quite focused questions to understand that experience. So we also talked about the different methods in qualitative research, and this was phenomenology, ethnography, and grounded theory. So make sure you have a look over these. They're not sort of difficult once you get the understanding. Because they sort of do make sense then, that phenomenology, looking at that general experience, ethnography, they're looking at cultural understanding and also in specific groups, and grounded theory is sort of looking qualitative but also then trying to build a theory from this. We talked about the research designs, interviews, focus groups and observations, and this was to give us a different idea, and so how do these all form and what sort of aspects. And we talked about this in relation to the rules of qualitative research. And so when we're looking and critiquing the research article, we were looking for, did they follow these rules? And one of the things that we talked about was, had they used an actual format for following the use, and that was the Core X. And so have a look at the article, link into that, because it shows you what are the rules for qualitative research. We also then sort of talked about how the ethics in relation to the actual qualitative research. And so we looked at the actual ethics within the module. So have a look yourself. And we talked, one of the most questions that students talked about is the difference between beneficence and non-maleficence, where they both are sort of to do good, but that non-maleficence is to do no harm, and beneficence is to do good for a greater number. And so similar, but often in research you may be doing something which might harm and cause distress for those that you're actually doing interviews with, but in the overall you're giving a general understanding to improve outcomes for all. We also talked about what is a theory, and we talked about sort of different theories that you might have seen in psychosocial. So we talked about Orum's theory of self-care. We also talked about the Bandura theory of self-efficacy. And we discussed where theories or conceptual frameworks are often presented in research articles. And this is in the first part, the literature review, the background. And this sort of sets the framework for how the methods, the way the researcher actually completed the research has actually gone forward. And then my little diagram there of qualitative and quantitative, because you really need to start to sort of really have a strong understanding of, is it qualitative or quantitative? So the next thing we actually did was the activity, which was looking at the article and pulling it apart and identifying population, interests, feminine, and then also the context. We also looked at finding where the journal impact factor was written, and we scrolled through and looked at the different parts of the journal, including its background, its method. We looked also at the highlights and how important they were for understanding your own evidence-based practice and linking this to your practice. So we also talked about A2 and where to start. And so one of the things I reinforce to students is starting is what we're doing in the tutorials. And this is going over what is the different parts in qualitative research, next week quantitative, and the week after mixed method. And so think about this, look at your answers, discuss them with your friends, and if you've got any major questions, ask them on the Teams site. But the answers are all there, and we did go through them quite well in the tutorials this week. Some students ran out a bit of time, so make sure you actually get a chance to sort of just revise that. And you could do it in the context of your preparing for A2. Because now you've done a workshop 3 activity, you've actually partly done the work in relation to an annotated bibliography. So I think we're sort of getting this sense that everyone is overwhelmed of what is an annotated bibliography. Have a Google. It is literally a summary of research of an article. And so listen to the little library capture where the person talks about what is expected. Now you can write it in 2 ways. You can use headings if you're a sort of heading or a quantitative person, or if you like to flow, then you can actually just write it like as a summary. But the main thing is there's 3 main aspects to this 200 words for each article annotated bibliography. Introduce the main purpose and scope of this research. And so talk about this research was looking at self-efficacy in the relationship between a person with dementia and their carer in the early stage of dementia. The author significance you might want to bring in, that because this particular article that we looked at in workshop 3 really had significant authors. So these authors are well published in this area. The journal was a high impact factor, which all sort of helps us look at this research and saying this is strong research. Summarise the important parts. So what was the theory they used? Where do we find that? In the background. Then we look in the method. So they used a qualitative descriptive method. It was interpretive. They're looking, they had an idea that self-efficacy would influence the partner relationship because they mentioned that in the background. And then they went through, they looked at their sample, their setting, so it was based in the community. They wanted early stage. They have an operational definition defining dementia and what they meant by that. And that, again, is sitting in the methods. These are all aspects that you might like to summarise for the articles you choose in your annotated bibliography. And then sort of look at that conclusion. What did they find? What was the so what? They found that if you support couples early on in dementia, they're more likely to be able to self-manage. They're more likely to be able to see positive. And so this is something then that we can then identify as we evaluate it. This is useful. It did have limitations. The article talked about limitations, and we can also look at limitations. It was a small qualitative sample. These were people that had come forward. So if you're struggling, maybe that sample of people didn't come forward. So maybe self-efficacy can only be built in people that are already looking for help. If you're already overwhelmed, can you then be taught the aspects of self-efficacy? Find another article to support that, because that's what this is all about. Not just about understanding one article, but how to actually be critical of that article. Is this research translatable to your area? What setting was it in? Are you a community-based? Do you work in emergency? Is this going to be able to be used in your article, in your research? These are the questions and then the answers that you write in your annotated bibliography. Remembering it is concise. So decide what points you want to bring forward. 200 words isn't a lot, but then the point is to sort of decide what's most important for you. So now that you have that high level of self-efficacy from your workshops and understanding sort of that first little aspect, read over the case study. That's the key point. Understand what this case study is about. Desiree, her diabetes, her non-compliance because of her health literacy levels. So then our articles relate to those different aspects. So then choose 3 articles. Now I think choose articles that you like. You want to be able to read them and understand them. So there's a whole range. There's some qualitative, mixed methods, and there's some reviews. So choose something that you like, that you think, if I was going to make recommendations for this case study, what would I be doing? You don't have a big understanding of diabetes, chronic disease, health literacy, and self-management, but I'm sure that you could think of some things which might be useful to be talking to Desiree about. So then once you've got that, as you start reading these articles, decide what are the key points. And so I think just write the summary in your own words at first. So this article was done by good authors. I can see that they've got other publications. The journal is a strong journal. It's one that is well regarded in the nursing profession because I can look at its impact factor. I can see how many articles it publishes and how well they're cited. And then sort of decide, are you a qualitative or a quantitative person? Are you going to put headings and separate it out, or are you just going to let yourself run with this writing? But the main thing is to think of it's 200 words, not 20 words. That would be just ridiculous. But there's parts. So you want 3 articles, 200 words for each article. And so the part 1 is writing this annotative bibliography. Part 2 is looking at the strengths and the quality of these articles. So do they follow the rules as we know set out by this method that they've chosen? So if it's qualitative, are they doing interviews? Have they done a good analysis with them? Have they followed the rules of the researcher? Have they allowed time? Have they then put those transcripts in the results? And have they brought it back together to be the so what in the discussion? And have they brought forward recommendations which are useful for you? This is what our strengths are. And so we look at, the strengths and the rules in the actual article, the journal, the authors. We also look at sort of the quality. So can it be translated to your setting? Does the quality and the way it's written, is it of good quality? Is it easy to read or difficult? Remembering this is your annotated bibliography. And use our references to support that. So when they're saying that they use a thematic analysis, have a look at that article, because that's where you could then use a similar reference to say that a thematic analysis is appropriate for qualitative research, or that the researcher identified who they were, which is also appropriate for qualitative research. Or if you've chosen a quantitative one, you could say that this had enough sample to be translatable to generalisation in my practice. So these are the sort of aspects that we're wanting you to look for. The last part is recommendations. So if you've gone through this systematically, you've already got some idea of what you might like to bring forward as recommendations. You've chosen articles which support and give you that sort of information. But what we want you to do in this recommendations is pull the recommendations from those articles, but support it with other useful research. And so if you're sort of saying that when in relation to health literacy, that the person might need to have not only paper and oral information, but they may also benefit from having digital resources that they can link in on their phone and talk to their family about to help them understand the medications required, then find a journal article that talks about that how the importance of digital resources to support written resources. If you're looking at maybe having the family come in for education sessions, then that's something you would then use as a reference to support that. So hopefully that's given you a little bit more idea of what an annotated bibliography is and really actually how simple it is. And I think you're trying to sort of make it too complex. So work through this week's activity in relation to the qualitative article. We'll do the same thing next week in the quantitative article. So if you're really keen, you can actually then start working on some of those articles for A2 while you're in this week. So just in summary, we have hopefully reviewed Module 2 and don't forget to complete Week 3 quiz for that easy 5%. Stay in contact with us. So if you've got questions, go on the team site, engage with us. We're here to help you. Thank you.